All right, everybody. We're a couple minutes past the hour, so I think let's start. Welcome, everyone. So glad that we're all here for the inaugural Friday Lab / seminar meeting. I think I've referred to it many different ways because it was referred to community. I think we all know what this is. So for our first one, we're going to have an overview of Forever Green and what we've been doing. We have Nick and Colin that are going to be giving that interview. Mitch is online. Hi, Mitch, but he won't be presenting. And then Anne is super busy with farming, so Mitch and Colin will be, Nick and Colin will be presenting for that as well. So I'll hand it over to Nick.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, hello everyone, and how great to be part of this series of gatherings. And on behalf of the 4 so-called directors of the University of Minnesota, part of Forever Green, and Kirby on Cureton myself, really excited to present an overview of the sort of integrative things that try to weave together all of the parts of Forever. That's well, talking about putting on the table today. But we wanted to start, first of all, with the introduction of Claire Price, who is still relatively new, although is known to a lot of folks already in her role as a research and development program manager of Forever Green. And so we thought that it would be great for Claire to say a few things about who she is, where she comes from, and how she got here to Forever Green, and then to make a few comments also about this new process for thinking through how we use the funds that we have for R&D in the Forever Green project. And then we'll segue to the overview that Claire mentioned. So Claire, over to you.
Oh. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Claire Price. I'm the R&D program manager for Forever Green, mainly working under Hunter. Before I came here, so who I am. I'm actually from Maryland. I'm not a Midwesterner. I went to college here, moved around a bit, and then moved back here about 3 years ago. And for about 12 years, basically my main work out of college was working for a biodiversity contractor under USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. And I was very inelegantly laid off from that job because of politics. And I'm super fortunate that I landed here. Really excited to have been here. At that old job, I did a lot of qualitative research. I did a lot of project management, a lot of budget management, contract negotiations with the federal government. So some of that stuff is going to translate really wonderfully, and I have a lot to learn about the processes with academia and with the state. And it's been interesting. There's a lot to learn, and I'm excited about it. One of the big things that I have taken over, or learning how to do when I first came on, is to help start this RFP, this new RFP process, which I understand is like been changed a lot from the past. And it's been, I know that it's a lot of different things for folks. And it is the RFP, the proposals are due today. So thank you to everybody that has submitted already. And whoever is probably not attending this meeting and is frantically copying and pasting into Qualtrics. We miss you, and we'll see you next week. Good luck.
This is hours over. I will help you more.
You've got
A few hours left, right?
There's still like
4 hours.
Josh and I have a solid 4 more hours.
So yeah, I understand that was a big change for everybody. We have already, and before that, we had the crop team meetings, which was also a new process. And that was definitely a whirlwind for me, but meeting about 200 new people and learning about the kinds of new things that they did. I've already solicited feedback on those crop team meetings. We got some great some great ideas about how to improve it next time. If anyone wants to tell me anything else about their crop team meetings, email me anytime you want. After this proposal process is wrapped up, I'll definitely be soliciting more feedback for the process in general. You can email to me, or if you just want to talk to me, just email me and we'll talk. It's all good. Some of the pain points that we definitely heard from the crop team meetings were that maybe perhaps a limit on how much people should be able to propose, like budget wise. There wasn't really a lot of time to pitch ideas. People said, call it Shark Tank. I don't think that was our intention, but I guess that's how it was. So sorry for the stress that caused. And finding opportunities to make it even more collaborative and adaptive in how we help people pull it together, increasing participation even more. I know that was a goal of it, and we can get farther in that. And I appreciate any and all ideas about how to improve that. And we do have some ideas. I just don't want to promise anything yet, because we haven't thought the whole thing through. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Everyone's been like welcoming, and I'm excited to be involved. I think, it's going to be a learning process for me to work here. But I think when I think about what success in my job would be, it would be that the teams with whom I work, that their lives are a little bit easier and their programs are running just a little bit better. So that's my main goal. Yeah, I'm always a resource in this realm if you guys need me, and really happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Claire, and welcome. Thank you.
I just want to say that she will be like the main contact for these meetings. That's all the emails will be coming from her. I will be the backup. So she's not expecting what from me. So, and I'm Cora, just to clarify.
Well, all right then. So let's dive into our program here. And Claire, let me see if I can share my screen. So how is that not showing my screen? All right, there we go. Took a while. Let me comment a little bit on the title of what's cooking in the Forever Green Enterprise, and what we're trying to get at with this title is what are some things that are going on the ethical level. Forever Green as a whole. We know that Forever Green is something that, all right. Sure. That we know that Forever Green has really ambitious goals. We are trying on one hand to fundamentally diversify agriculture. We're trying by that to achieve a whole set of environmental goals. We are trying to develop an economic basis in our agricultural economy for realizing those goals. And we are also interested in how all of that work, in fact, affects rural communities and, in fact, the community of Minnesota as a whole, including urban farms as well. So this is obviously a big bundle of goals and aspirations, full of synergies, trade-offs, difficult questions of values and perspective, etc. We have some vehicles that we're trying to use to advance these goals. We have our R&D program, developing new crops. We have our commercialization and scaling work, building value chains that make these crops feasible in our agricultural economy. And we have work to develop supportive policy, which is obviously essential to achieving these goals. So we have these goals, we have these vehicles, and at the level of effort that sort of draws on all of these vehicles or all of these pillars of Forever Green, what is going on? What is cooking? That's the topic that we want to put on the table here as an overarching 10,000-foot view, if you will, of what's going on in Forever Green and Forever Green. Mostly what we do in the weekly lab meetings is we look at the R&D program. Mostly look in depth at R&D projects. But all of that work occurs in the context of the larger program. So what is cooking in that enterprise that embeds and gives context to the R&D work? So here's the menu, if you will, of works in progress that we want to talk about. And I'll just let that, I'm not going to read you the list, I'll just let you contemplate it. But these are a bunch of them that are all work that, broadly speaking, is at the whole of Forever Green level, the enterprise level, so to speak, that we wanted to talk about. The way that we're going to it's all on the table is that Colin is going to discuss first three items of menu, and then I will walk us through the remaining items, and we're going to be reasonably concise, I think, in what we say. So we'll have some room for conversation as we go along and at the end. Sound okay? Great. All right, Colin, over to you.
Okay. I think you need to stop sharing so that I can share.
Yep.
Try to get that right. But I can walk and chew gum at the same time. Hi, everyone. Colin Cureton, Director of Commercialization, Adoption, and Scaling for Forever Green. I've been in the role for, I've been with Forever Green for 6.5 years. In this role for about 3. And so at this stage, I feel kind of like a Christmas pirate. I feel like one leg, eye patch. And I'm like, I gotta still. But today, so that gets up on screen. I'm going to cover mainly these 2 topics, which are some emerging frameworks that we are playing with. Set things up. One is this emerging, what we're roughly calling a practical theory, or how we go about the business of commercializing and scaling a new continuous living crop, and also a visual, and I should say a perspective visual system for how we track and communicate how to develop these crops in our management space. I'm going to try and do this in about 15 minutes max, or less. Okay, so many of us are familiar with this next slide that is in a lagging fashion. Jumping up, here's the Forever Green portfolio. Right? We've all seen the honeycomb. Right now, we mostly communicate the honeycomb by the type of crop, if you will, perennial crops, winter annuals, woody perennials. Right? It's a common system for organizing crops. In the commercialization, adoption, and scaling space, it might be helpful to think about what phase of development, right? So regardless of whether they're a winter annual or perennial grain or oilseed, it's very common in research development, commercialization, scaling to think about phase of technology development, namely basic research, development, pre-commercial, early commercial. These categories might change. The point is that we're starting to think about, we have been operating for a long time, aware of these, but we're not really naming them, and we're not naming for stakeholders. So if you think of these, and I wouldn't say be particularly concerned about where you see a crop in a box, it's up for discussion, but this is roughly speaking where we see these crops facing. And then one or two questions I'll ask is, how do we understand the process of commercializing and scaling novel seeds and crops? Do we have a model plate? For a lot of years, we've basically been saying, well, it's a chicken or egg. You kind of have to do everything at once, right? You got to build supply while you build demand, while you build the crop, while you build supportive policy. And that can lead to a lot of frenetic energy and maybe not always the best strategic decision making. So when you read this literature, a lot of figures and papers come up like this. Shown the slide before, there is literature on farmer decision making, innovation processes, role of intermediaries, framework called multi-level perspectives, which is how these niche technologies interact with regimes, and how landscape level factors can break up those regimes and create pathways, niches. You have adoption curves among farmers, but also industry, early adopter, the innovators, early adopters, early majority, etc. So you have all these figures. The problem is they don't really give us many practical guides, and that's really hard. So, in honor of Donald's sake, damn. And so for just our commercialization program, we have operationally structured our work in four main categories: strategy, landscape, market, and operations. Now, if you zoom out to the framework of Forever Green, say we put that CAS strategy in the middle, and we talk about the scientific work and also the policy and systems change work. This roughly reflects our, you might have heard these verbs, push, pull, and lift, right? So the scientific work is pushing new technologies out into society. CAS work is intended to pull those crops into the market and onto the landscape. And then this language we have, societal lift, we need to lift those systems together to supportive social, cultural, and policy change. That's the basic theory of Forever Green that they highlighted. So in that, it started to become clear to me through lots of difficult experiences that there might actually be a method to madness. And this is very early. We haven't published this. It's not an operating framework yet. But, and I also want to emphasize, it's not a linear process. There's lots and lots of feedback loops. And it's not prescriptive. However, stage one, develop crop. I put it here, step zero. Do you have something real that can offer a solution to farmers for the industry? And if I didn't say it earlier, I'm going to walk through that kind of process that we're introducing. So it's a 5-step process. So I'm going to name them. The next step is we observe that it's really important that you run a place-based cross-sector key risk pilot that answers the question, can this crop be produced at a commercial scale? In the language of business and entrepreneurship, it's called validating your product, right? You say, I think I have a product. And someone says, show me a customer wants it. It doesn't mean go to market. It means validate the product. Then this is an interesting step where a lot of people as the Department of Agriculture, we say, great, we have a product. Let's take it to farmers. That's a recipe for difficulty. I'll tell you why. Because first, you need to go get a market. This is a redirect we don't think about very often. But if you take that tool directly to farmers without understanding whether there's a market for it, whether anyone wants it, and what the role of it on the landscape can be, you're going to create a lot of difficulty. So you need to go and get a market partner. That is not the first time you talk to the market. Ideally, you bring the crop in dialogue with the market and with farmers. But really, before commercial launch, you need someone in the market that says, I'm going to be responsible for this and I commit to it. All right. Then the really fourth step is that demand from that market partner or set of market partners pulls that crop on the landscape, answers the basic question, great, the market wants it. Is anyone willing to grow it? The economics work for them. We have a few crops that market wants rye for distilling and feed, but there's a price gap between corn and hybrid rye, and can't get more hybrid rye acres. It's $3 corn and $4 rye, and that is restricting farmer adoption. And then you essentially need to iterate this process, show success. You might need to launch another variety, grow the market, grow the farmer base. And then generally policy can be engaged earlier, but really we've observed that policy is responsive to interests, attraction, not really only ideas. So we as a platform can take the state government grand ideas, and we do often, but when we bring our friends, entrepreneurs, communities, farmers, kind of bigger businesses, they're very responsive to bringing barriers down and creating support policy. So this looks a little different than let's do everything all at once. Okay? So this is just an emerging framework for between camelina, ferns, pennycress, hybrid rye, hazelnuts. We've got 5 or 6 crops in the portfolio that we can observe the patterns around these things. It's slightly different. Okay, so that's the emerging practical theory. Nothing revelatory, but it does guide strategic choices about what we should be doing now, right? The next question, if I'm okay on time, is how does Farm Green communicate overall crop development and progress to our stakeholders? It's a really important question because we have a big network of people that think our solutions are further along than they are, or they're not aware of what progress we've made. And there is a general mismatch between their understanding and our work, and we don't have a tool yet to track it ourselves or to share with them where things are at. So we have an emerging tool. Well, before I get to that, I just want to say that a bunch of agencies involved in new technology development have these frameworks. So the Department of Energy has technology to market readiness matrix. And this actually shows just, this is more of a phase time. So it's a technology readiness, just to figure out how it is. But they actually demonstrate 3 values of that. You have to kind of 1 value of that. There's really the technology development value of that, commercialization value of that, and the scaling value of that. So you need to go through these phases. It's not just one phase of difficulty. It's many. Sorry. Changing agriculture is hard. Okay. And also DOE has an accompanying adoption readiness matrix that includes basically a 2x2 the technology readiness, but also how ready is the system to adopt these solutions and then match those technologies from research to development, demonstration to deployment. CGIAR has a scaling readiness matrix that's very similar. It looks at innovation use and innovation readiness. So just observing that these frameworks exist and we don't have one yet. And that presents challenges to us to advance our mission. Okay, so we're developing this basic tool called the Green Crop Tracker. It's not populated yet, but I'll just share it. I've been involved in developing indices in other areas of work to communicate to policymakers. Indices oversimplify. It is very difficult to reduce our work to like a scale, right? But there are lots of tools that I think it's important to emphasize that elegance doesn't mean simple, right? So ideally you can get an elegant tool that actually reflects the state of our work. And so in mapping these 12 dimensions, if I can color code this, there are 4 subdimensions per area for everybody's work. So we have push, pull, and lift. And then within those, within the scientific category, we have state of development of the germplasm, agronomy, characterization, uses, and environmental impacts. Within economy, we have farmer adoption, supply chain market, and investment. And within societal lift, we have supportive policy, risk management, farmer engagement, leadership. Okay, so there's some notes down there that I'll skip for now, but it's just to emphasize this is a developmental index. It doesn't equate to scale. So we can have a developed crop that isn't operating at a lot of scale. And we can have other crops that aren't very well developed, but are like scaling or they're ready to scale. So it doesn't really reflect impact. In any case, you could use this tool to map the entire forever green portfolio, which I'm trying to do. Or you could, for crops, and hit one crop, right? Then going back to how we think about our portfolio, I took a shot at mapping those different phases by crop sets. So on the far left, you have development stage crops. In the middle are pre-commercial, on the edge of commercial in this region. And then on the right are early commercial. So based on our understanding of how these crops are making progress in the world, at least one spot check is that you can see level of activity expanding. This is obviously not even a beta product. It could look very different with good design tools, and the underlying metrics should be co-developed, not by any one person. And then some challenges will be to standardize type of scaling, but that happens in indices all the time. Human development, for example. Okay, so lastly, I want to go back to this slide and then bring these 2 things together and say that through, again, more difficult experiences, we've observed that crop needs to be at a rough baseline stage of development to move on to the next steps of this process. And I won't go into detail. What we've observed, probably it's too small to see there, but to understand whether you have something that can move out to pilot, you need some new germplasm, and you need some basic agronomic standards for how to grow. You're not going to take that to a farmer to pilot on a farm until you have that, or if you do, it's going to fail. So sorry, and in that piloting phase, it's usually underwritten by government, NGO, community leadership, right? So that early community stage often comes in, so we have to understand, is community engaged in this problem at any level before we go and try to put it on this farm? And getting that market partner, they're going to ask you about characterization uses. Do you have the LCA? And if we don't, it's a big problem, right? So we need that front end work on what is in the seed? What is in this soil profile? What does the meal look like? And also, what are the soil, water, and climate impacts of this crop? So you can start to see. And then farmers, you tend to need the next level of agronomic expertise, including field-based agronomy TA and grower guide, agronomic resources that actually support them success at early commercial scale. And then ideally, I think for Evergreen's work, it's especially critical at bringing this balanced system to like ready for others to get more widely engaged, right? So that doesn't mean if we succeed in this process, we get to like the perfect scale crop solution. It means that we as a university R&D innovation platform are bringing a viable, coherent tool to society for other investors to engage, for corporations to engage, for other universities to engage in. So we're iterating on this, but this is really the next level of approach for Evergreen. We wanted to have this ready by the time. It's not. Fast forward 4 or 5 months, and it's still not ready, but it's at least can be communicated in a safe space. And then lastly, I want to tell you about one thing that's underway that's tackling all these scaling challenges together. The next phase of exciting work on Metro Camelina. The project has been called the 1 million acre scaling study. We received support from 4 different funders: Village Initiative, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Connect Foundation, and National Wildlife Federation to put together a coordinated cross-sector scaling study. We just hired a firm led by Vanessa Wood-Price. She has brought on an all-star cast of characters that will be working on farmer economics, Camelina, the market and supply chain development, custom CI scoring for that's carbon intensity, custom CI scoring for priority regions and cropping systems. There's a partner circle that's convened by Humboldt, and this project is kicking off. Oh, I should say the policy and regulatory environment as well. It's very important to essentially develop a scaling roadmap with our cross-sector partners for how we move camelina and winter oilseeds together toward their first 1 million acres over the coming, say, decade. So that's really exciting. Broadly speaking, Evergreen is thinking about how we engage in scaling planning. This is one active project where we're trying to bring those components together. So, my section.
I think it would be appropriate to have a little window for comments, questions, so what you have just seen and heard.
I could talk to you for hours about that stuff. One question though is, how do you, when you had your steps of, is it a thing? Does it work on the land? How do you think about like early adopter farmers? Because they kind of play this mediary role that maybe they're the place that you could take a 5-gallon bucket of something that you don't know if it'll work, or they could, yeah. How do you think about different types of farmers?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jess. There's one of the system science proposals I'm involved in is about the adoption process.
Mm.
And there's really good literature out there on this like spectrum of adoption.
Mm.
And that adoption at maturity, it really means like this thing is integrated into operation into our society. And a lot of what we might call adoption is really trialing.
Sure.
And so it's like the willingness of those innovators and early adopters, especially the innovators, to essentially trial things in partnership with us.
Mm.
Like even that pilot, in the case of Camelina, it's going to put 120 acres out, 10 growers at 10 to 30 acres each, right? And that I would still consider like a commercial pilot. So I think a lot of what happened, early on, but trialing category.
Yeah, like commercial piloting, yeah.
Yeah, yes, and that trialing, and then really like the Clearwater increase was we did,
Mhm.
what, 40 acres across 3 or 4 farms. That doubled with water quality trials, and this was kind of a validating step.
Mhm.
And then we can talk more about like subsequent to there. I think we basically developed a farmer coalition, but not a clear,
Mhm.
clear strategy partnership around market.
Mhm.
And that's strategic choice because we back to that understanding the potential
Mhm.
of that particular brain when really a strategic choice that we're trying to learn from.
Mhm.
So anyways.
Yeah,
I think
because
yeah.
you almost could say that we're not quite even out of that like piloting phase, even though a lot of people are growing it. Yeah, that's super interesting.
This might be a little far out, but do you see a point like on the embassies where a crop would sort of graduate from like forever green and like what markers would need to be had? I know that would be like so hypothetical.
We are perpetual helicopter parents.
Yeah.
We're gonna have the biggest graduation party.
You didn't even talk about IP.
Might get held back a year.
I could see that. I mean, that's a relevant strategic choice is how long and at what level of depth choices. That's for the R&D community and for everybody as a whole to think about. You know, at what point do we feel like we've offered a tool and we need to engage other partners versus now that we've developed this expertise, we should maintain it. And part of the strategy with the winter oil seeds has been in that earliest commercial partnership with Secure, we said we don't want to bought out to businesses built like this. We understand that there's a long process of change. Right? So maintaining that role for at least, a decade, 2 decades, having continuity, I feel like was like something they, as a strategy with philosophy, having the continuity really important long-term process.
I mean, like as an enterprise, we're growing those different bases of development.
Yeah.
It's like that's like just new frontiers and how to be involved. Like,
Maybe one more comment or segue. Josh, will you? Yeah, we'll make it short. Do you envision using this framework? I mean, in some ways you already are, but just essentially organized for everybody in there. In terms of teams that kind of represent, you already have an R&D team, you have a commercialization team, you have a smaller agronomy type team. And now with revenue partnerships, now we should have a policy, building a policy. Do you see those teams kind of following these steps and directing where their efforts go?
Yeah.
In terms of how they handle each crop?
First of all, I would never try to organize for. No, I think we're hoping to offer them as tools. So I do think that a new perennial crop, a new winter annual crop, if they're in the same phase of crop development, they're probably facing similar challenges around resourcing that effort. Particular funders are interested in the development phase, and others are interested in the like scaling phase. Others are in the wavefront R&D, and so there could be interesting coalitions between teams. I think it could, in a future kind of simplified version, help a wide audience. Some people think like you can go plant pennycress right now, and we just don't have a simple way to tell them, oh yeah, Bayer bought out this company, but it's not really available to farmers yet. So that's in that like investment was way out developed, but like farmer adoption was still good. So anytime you introduce a metric system, you have the challenge of making that digestible. But a lot of tools out there like donut economics have become to communicate it kind of intuitively. It can be really helpful understanding like, oh, this part is development, this part is.
I think it's also really critical for the next iterations on the R&D, the RFP phase. I think that was one of the initial ideas too, is right? Like we need a tracker for how to prioritize research, as we develop RFPs. So everybody can see very clearly these are where the needs are at, right? In terms of the R&D enterprise.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Colin. And I hope you guys see how what we're speaking of represent new thinking about how we pull pieces of forever being together in this Colin's framework. And what Josh and Josh were both saying about how that models like that serve as a way of integrating the three parts, and so we can be more clear about how we pursue our very ambitious, complex goals. So let me continue in that vein. Other things. So, very lag. So, the rest of the menu is as follows, and let me just dive right in. One thing that is important for us to be aware of is the existence of the draft of a revised and updated nutrient reduction strategy, state of Minnesota. And you can see that document over there on the right side of the slide. And there's some things in that document that we want to make sure everyone in this appropriate network is aware of. So first of all, the document is very explicit about calling for a lot more CLC agriculture in order to meet the goals in terms of in our waters, state of Minnesota, specifically 8 million more acres CLC. It also explicitly calls for, and I quote, a campaign vastly CLC Minnesota. And the Department of Agriculture is charged with organizing that. And this is all draft, by the way. Final strategy will not be done and publicized until the end of this year. But in this draft, it's called for the campaign. The campaign is carried out by a task force. Again, that's the language that's changed. Strategy. And again, MDA is charged with organizing this task force. University of Minnesota is mentioned to be involved. And I also wanted to share another quote: human dimension needs to be understood. And what the point of that statement is that the authors of the draft are recognizing that we cannot imagine that we would achieve the production goals with science-based information showing everyone the light. And rather, they're acknowledging the complex social dynamics that need to be addressed and worked through. And presumably, that's what the campaign will be trying to get its arms around. That's what the task force will be charged with thinking through. But it's all pretty encouraging. Another topic, and really related, is there seems to be an opportunity to try to organize, and probably could be in the thick of the organizing of the time, the driving the bus, an effort to make headway in our very significant public health problem of drinking water contamination. So, and this summer, a collaborative work group, which consisted of large part of the farmers who live in farm in South Minnesota, issued the report that there's a screenshot of the front page there with their writing. And there were 4 recommendations. And the first 2 of the recommendations are over there in the lower left-hand part of this slide, namely more living roots in the ground for longer periods, more alternative crops and land uses. Obviously, this is completely aligned with the project. And given that this public health situation in southeast Minnesota is widely seen as an important public problem, there's a lot of stars that are aligning that make it. You think the program directors think that it's very sensible to try to be proactive in Forever Green in trying to, as I said, in the thick of organizing something like that. We've actually been working on this for several years, invested a lot of effort in it already at an organizing level, but this has all been somewhat under the radar screen of our interests. And the sort of public profile of what Forever Green says it's working on and what Forever Green says it's trying to do for the world. So, so this is something that deserves to be put on the table as we're talking today. There are big opportunities probably in such a project around scaling sustainable aviation fuel, that's SAF, mostly think about, but also scaling sustainable animal feed, which is another really significant SAF that is concerned about. So that's that. Forever Green continues to try to build our ability to be aware of the social and societal impacts of what we do and to steer ourselves in a direction that is aligned with the values of the program and around them. Obviously, this is a time which agricultural economy in the state of Minnesota and the whole West is under enormous pressure. This is kind of the point of farm aid. This is a time when rural communities broadly are under tremendous pressure. That's also ongoing. And it is, you know, a stated goal at say a slogan level that Forever Green will benefit rural communities and will benefit farmers. But exactly how our work adds up to do that and what is even seen as benefiting a rural is very complicated. I was in a conversation yesterday with some of the regents of the University of Minnesota. We were talking about this topic of the welfare of rural communities, and it was being pointed out that Morris, Minnesota, has become a lot more vital since the Riverview Dairy, which is a very large confinement dairy operation, began operating in the vicinity of Morris. So this whole question of what makes for rural vitality is your classic complex world problem. And yet it doesn't seem right to us directors, at least, and we think this reflects the values of the Forever Green Network as a whole. It doesn't seem right to ignore. So how do we get our collective ability to that? And we are an equity working Forever Green, which you guys may or may not have heard much about. That working group continues to work. We continue to invest financially and otherwise in this whole effort. And I guess I'll just, in the interest of time, leave it at that. But this remains to us a very important part of what we're trying to do. And unlike anything else in Forever Green, a really complex and very important effective. Speak tongue in cheek about the health. All right, second to last in this laundry list of stuff is the challenge of upping our game in terms of both how we communicate with the world and the very closely related question of how we form a coherent and legible to the rest of the world strategy. So this slide is from Ann Kirby, our Director of Partnerships and Outreach, and not able to join us today, but it's very much a thought partner in this whole presentation. And the big picture of the slide is that we recognize that there's a lot of work to be done at the level of developing strategy, at the level of having robust and impactful communications infrastructure. And in terms of the many different ways that we both the world are being worked. And so at the strategy level, we need more definition. We need that definition to represent the shared strategy, not just of the University of Minnesota parts of them, of course, but of a larger network that is the chair's objective of scaling sales to the agriculture. In terms of communications, we need materials to communicate that are that enable us to be truly strategic in communications. In other words, when we have strategic goals, communication is certainly a really critical way of pursuing those goals. You've got to have that. And a very important way that we engage with the world is through events, various kinds. And events like communications are powerful tools for building strategic alignment. So all of this stuff is very much central to the work that Ann Kirby is doing, and she is obviously only one human as she is. And shout out to Ann for baking the cookies at God knows what hour in the morning. Night, sometimes.
She
But,
calls it
Ann
stress
kind of
baking. She calls it stress baking. I heard her say that yesterday.
Joanne is trying to organize all of this work, provide leadership and strength. The Forever Green Forum, to take a moment to appreciate that, was sort of the epitome of us being proactive about trying to engage the world and awareness about what Forever Green is all about, Forever Green Network, not just the sort of part of the larger network is achieved. And of course, it was very important to honor the legacy of and Anne felt that it would be valuable for us to take a moment to recognize the pretty impressive range of folks that showed up for one part or another of the forum and were represented. All right, last topic. As Claire mentioned at the outset, we have this new R&D process, and we had an old R&D process for some time. So between 2014 and 2024, there were roughly, Mitch counted all this up, there were roughly 76 program funded R&D projects, and they were generally chosen in what we could describe as more or less a competitive process. And under the leadership of Josh Gamble and others, we have a different process that in many ways is much more cooperative. And so I wanted to take a moment to highlight a couple of things. First of all, this whole process, as most people on the call know, I think, is driven by the idea that a crop team would decide together what were critical R&D processes in a dialogue deliberation process slash Shark Tank. It's ideally more the former, but possibly had qualities of the latter that were done. And so, you know, thing that I think is really important about this is that Forever Green is organized, we say this publicly all the time, into these crop teams. And we talk about how the crop teams work from genomics, food science and uses, and we talk about the way that the crop teams pursue an R&D agenda for each crop that is presumably based on collective thinking and being smart and strategic about what most is doing. And it's not that easy. And it requires a lot of leadership and some kind of structure to do that. And I think that what Josh and others have devised, Larry has mentioned to shepherd, bird cats around for the last few months, is a real advance in how this notion of crop teams, I think that's the fundamental engine of Forever Green, which was the Wise position, that the thing that drives Forever Green is crop R&D. Then it behooves us to try to make that better. And I think at this round, our reports might have is, I think, a very encouraging advance. And the final thing I'll say about it is Forever Green, in many ways, is all about how do we organize cooperation among different folks at larger and larger scales to address more and more complex challenges as we pursue our big area of audacious goal of CLC agriculture across the West. And Forever Green, in many ways, is all about innovation. And so here we have an example of innovation in how we cooperate, how we cooperation at larger scales, better, more efficiently. So yay for us. Thank you, Josh, and for the other folks that devised this process. And all blame goes to Josh and Claire.
I think I'd throw Kevin Smith in that.
Yeah, I think.
He had a pretty large hand in the structure of
I
this.
would say though, like, just to comment on that, it's definitely different. It was a challenge. It was crammed into a pretty narrow space of time following the forum, and that was part of the reason why it felt so rushed. And I think it's one iterative step in the right direction. Next year we will have more, or next RFP we will have more time. And I think with everybody's feedback, we'll continue to improve upon that process for the goals that they've just stated.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
thanks
think,
everyone for bearing with it.
yeah, it's a good beta test. Yeah.
Trial by fire. That's how you learn. Yeah, Shark Tank. Next time I pitch it.
See, if we knew it was Shark Tank, we could have like the demos and like the set and the
Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban, yeah. The Queen of QVC.
Well, let's just open up for any comments, questions, especially for folks online about the stuff that we Green directors wanted to put on the table. This year levies off.
I'll just jump in and say real quickly to thank Anne and Cora for organizing our farm and fields tour yesterday. That went very well. Put in a lot of hard work. It's a lot of fun. Being part of that.
Wonderful.
Talk with the,
Posted about it, it's really good.
so who did?
Who did?
Yeah,
Oh, cool. Oh,
Wait.
good. That's great.
Oh, that's
Who
awesome.
say that out loud?
CPAN.
Oh, C-Fans does. Mm,
She said some of the band stuff.
oh,
I thought it was a success. A
mhm.
lot of the farmers that were there that I spoke with were really
Yeah.
engaged and were having a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. I ended up getting them. Yeah. I talked to so many people. Everyone was so engaged. Mhm.
Oh, that's great.
We will be at the Homegrown Village tomorrow, tomorrow, 12 to 5. But we're gonna be at Harvard, so that's the guy.
There was a really good event going on in last night. They had farm aid at Zero Farms and former FSA director was there. Wood Valley, a bunch of other organizations, farmer advocacy organizations, farmers. And Commissioner Peterson, and they gave a kind shout out to just the relationships that we hold with those partners. Good farmers. It's great, cool. Thanks for here yesterday, it was also. Good. One more visual to share. I think a lot of what Nick shared, things like the nutrient reduction strategy and whatnot. I think we're really contending with this process a lot
Mhm.
and having a strategy to basically compress the peaks and valleys will be really important. I think as who's going through this, I see no alternative to Camelina going through this. For those that can't see a screen, it's about how people engage with the innovation process. They get extremely excited about new things, and those new things can almost never deliver fast enough at their full potential. It can take decades to come down the cost curve. And that often leads to something called the peak of inflated expectations. So the more resources we get, sometimes this more scared I get that people's expectations that we can deliver tens of millions of gallons of SAF, is like, not for a while,
Yeah.
And then having a strategy to not lose people in the trough. They say that didn't work,
Yeah.
rather than say, oh, we're calibrating.
Mhm.
And then to like more quickly get on the slope of yeah, which where are we got? It goes like this, and then people say, oh, that's gonna be my different,
Yeah,
and then you lose them. So like our
Yeah.
organizing strategy, I think just have to recognize this and protect it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I wonder, yeah.
And that's not just true of individual crops, that's true
Yeah.
of the entire Forever Green project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna allude to that as well, because like that conversation comes up a lot in the climate change, which is this is related to, because it's like we needed to be carbon zero, negative or neutral like 10 years ago. Like, why can't you make this fat? Like, people just get so impatient sometimes. Yeah. And I wonder if it's sometimes in that realm, it helps to talk about like silver buckshot instead of silver bullets. Like all the like, don't just think of this one thing that's going up and down. Like, look at how that's increasing, and then we have all these other things that are like pieces of the puzzle as well. Sometimes that helps like simmer down the jitters, but it's not easy times because the world around us that we're trying to solve keeps getting worse so fast, so much faster than our solutions are coming online. Yeah.
What are the strategic guardrails that Forever Green leadership is thinking about to ensure that Forever Green, like, because this is like a broad, it's from R&D, crop development, all the way to commercialization, to allow Forever Green to be productive within that full span of work, but also not to be so diffuse as to not make the impact that you would like to see out of your work. But like, just curious how I guess using this framework to how you choose work engage with, to kind of keep it from becoming too diffuse.
Yeah.
So with 15 crops, and essentially more arising, you know.
Well, just a really good example I'll share quickly is we're having a lot of productive engagement with partners that are working on reintroducing small grains, especially in southern Minnesota. No effort, lots of articles recently. And like as a public institution, you want to have boundaries, but that are also somewhat porous, right? Like you don't want to have needs bounce off public platforms. But then we also are trying to find intersections between like, it's like diversified agriculture and continuous agriculture are not 100% overlap. Like you can have diversified agriculture with a bunch of aerosol. And we could like only scale one winter oilseed, not be very diversified. So like, but the overlap is quite large. But in general, like that example, our guiding strategy that like, can we get every small grain acre, oat acre, be a still seed acre by like offering solutions on the back end. They're now plow down. So that's just one example. It's like you don't want to have too much mission growth. Just because we'll ask you to, but you should also be responsive to our partners. Any questions or comments online? You didn't hear much from anyone online? Yeah. Speaking of, we wrap. Yeah. Barry, you want to close this out?
So,
Yeah, it was a great presentation.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, since folks online are probably secretly just working on this right now, maybe that's why. Thanks everybody for a wonderful first Friday night seminar share. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Claire, thanks.